Hello everyone. In this video we look at the idea of what is ionic equilibrium. Now lot of basic things that we have covered in chemical equilibrium will still hold true in the case of the ionic equilibrium. So the only difference is going to be here we will talk about the equilibrium involving ions. So we will see where the ions will come from and how do we analyze equilibrium in the case of the ions. Now if you look at the substances that are available to us in chemistry, we can classify the substances into these two categories. One is what we call as electrolytes and the other one is non-electrolytes. Now this classification is the one that is going to help us in understanding the concept of ionic equilibrium. So what we'll see is that the idea of ionic equilibrium will be the one that will occur in the case of electrolytes. So what are these electrolytes? If you look at electrolytes, these are substances either in the aqueous solution, either in the state of aqueous solution where they are dissolved in water, or in the molten form. They will be able to produce ions. What they will be able to do? They will be able to produce ions. And these ions can conduct electricity. So if that is happening in an electrolytic cell, in +2 chemistry we will study about what is this electrolytic cell in detail. In electrolytic cell, what happens is we'll have a substance either in the molten state or in the aqueous solution, and we will be inserting electrodes, the positive electrode and the negative electrode, and what we'll see is there will be a movement of ions because of the passage of current. This is what we'll be calling as the electrolysis process. So the electrolytes are those substances which will dissociate. That is the basic property. When they will dissociate when they are present in an aqueous solution or when they are in the molten state. So what are these substances that can have this property? If you look at the broad types of chemical substances, we will see that the substances which we are going to call as acids, and the substances which we will be calling as bases, and of course salts. These are the three classes of substances that will be able to have the property of an electrolyte. Now what is the basis on which we will call substances as acids? What is the basis on which we will call substance as base? What is the basis on which we will call substances as salts? We will learn about this in the further videos of the chapter. So we will have in fact theories that will try to explain how we can classify the substances into acids and how we can classify the substance into bases, and what will be the salts. So generally, to give a broad idea, salts will be a product of the acid base reaction. So if you have an acid and base combining, we will call those reactions as neutralization reactions, and the salts will be a product of the neutralization reaction. So this is broadly what we have as electrolytes. So the idea of electrolytes is what is going to be the basis for the ionic equilibrium. So when we talk about ionic equilibrium, we are essentially talking about the equilibrium that will be happening in the case of the electrolytes. Now if you look at what is the other type, the other class of substances we said will be called as non-electrolytes. Essentially they will be non-conducting. When they will be non-conducting? Either in the aqueous solution state or in the molten state. So these substances, they will not be able to produce ions when they are in the aqueous solution state or when they are in the molten state. What are the examples? If you take substances like sugar, urea, even glucose, so all of them, right, they will not be able to produce any ions and they will not be able to have any dissociation. That is why we call them as what? Non-electrolytes. So the idea of ionic equilibrium, right, or the concept of ionic equilibrium is the one that we'll discuss in case of electrolytes. But is it going to be for all the electrolytes? No. If you look at electrolytes, further we will be dividing them into two categories. One is what we call as strong electrolytes, and the other one is the weak electrolytes. So we'll divide the electrolytes into the two categories, strong electrolytes and then weak electrolytes. What is this strong electrolyte? Strong electrolytes are the one that will almost undergo 100% dissociation. They will fully undergo dissociation. So the idea of equilibrium, remember even in the context of chemical equilibrium we have discussed about it. if there are reactions which almost undergo 100% completion, then there is no point in studying about the concept of equilibrium over there, because that reaction is essentially proceeding in one direction. So if you look at the strong electrolytes which are almost undergoing complete dissociation, there will be no scope for the idea of equilibrium. Where the scope for the idea of equilibrium comes, it comes in the case of the weak electrolytes. So what happens in the case of weak electrolytes? They will not undergo complete dissociation. They will be having only partial dissociation. And the idea of ionic equilibrium will be exactly coming in the case of the weak electrolytes. So we'll see the weak electrolyte means we can have weak bases, we can have weak acids, we can have weak salts. Strong electrolyte means we can have strong acids, we can have strong bases, and we can have salts which will be acting as strong electrolytes. In those cases, we will not talk about the equilibrium. We only talk about the equilibrium in the case of the weak electrolytes. So for the weak electrolytes which are undergoing only partial dissociation, the concept of degree of ionization, which we also call by the name as fractional dissociation, degree of ionization or fractional dissociation, this is going to be important in case of the weak electrolytes. And we'll discuss about this alpha. Alpha is the symbol that we use to represent it. So this alpha will basically signify what is the fraction of the molecules that are undergoing dissociation. So how do we measure alpha? It is the number of molecules dissociated as ions divided by the total number of molecules dissolved, or total number of molecules present. We can also measure this in terms of the moles ratio. How do we measure it? Number of moles dissociated by the total number of moles that are dissolved or that are available. So this is how we can talk about the degree of ionization or fractional dissociation in case of the weak electrolytes. And as we have talked about it, if we have a strong electrolyte, whatever the number of moles that are available, all the number of moles will be dissociating. So what we see is for the strong electrolytes, the value of alpha will be almost equal to 1. And for the weak electrolytes, it will be lesser. So it can be, so if it is a very weak electrolyte, right, then the value of alpha is going to be significantly less. So this is what we will have as the idea of ionic equilibrium. So the ionic equilibrium is the concept that we will be discussing in case of the weak electrolytes.